Joining us now with a closer look at Micron's results, CFRA Research Senior Equity Analyst Angelo Zeno. Angelo, what do you think of these results here? It looks like it's a pretty decent beat across the board.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. Overall, yeah, you're right. It was a pretty decent beat across the board. We were looking for about a 9% sequential decline from the company, and I think it was about a 7.5 sequential decline, still implying year-over-year growth of about 38% or so. And clearly, you guys kind of alluded to the beat on the EPS side, and the guidance also kind of slightly above expectations. And we're not necessarily surprised the weakness kind of going into the quarter and why the stock actually underperformed relative to a lot of names in the second half of last year was because of some of the weakness on the consumer side of things. But the bigger story from Micron is obviously kind of the AI tilt tied to them. And you're going to see that business really kind of ramp up here throughout calendar 25 and even become a bigger piece of that business in 26 and 27. So I think, the stock as of late, at least, year to date has been performing, notably better than a number of the other semi names out there. And I think rightfully so, because you've got a really nice secular story here tied to what you guys almost kind of alluded to in terms of the memory space, a very commoditized area of the market. But as you kind of shift towards these higher value offerings out there, I think you've got a really good story, heating up here from Micron.
So Angelo, Julie and I were just talking about this. Where do you feel like we're at with the AI story for Micron? Is it still early innings, I guess, as we like to say, right, and growing in that stage, or are we a little bit further along?
I think for Micron specifically, relative to a lot of other names out there, they were actually a little bit late to the game when it comes to high bandwidth memory and kind of getting in there. And so, we think it's still early innings for them. When you kind of look at high bandwidth memory, I think in the press release, they just alluded to the fact that they just surpassed about $1 billion in revenue. I think that's about 12% or so of their revenue, so just over 10% of their revenue. When you kind of look at the trajectory and the roadmap that Jensen Huang just provided at GTC this week in terms of Blackwell Ultra and Rubin, and then more importantly, going down to Rubin Ultra, kind of providing 3 iterations out there, moving towards high bandwidth memory 4 next year. The upside, we think, is going to be significantly higher. You're talking about billions in terms of revenue for high bandwidth this year, and even much larger going into 27 and 28. So we think early innings, at least for Micron specifically. And again, the important part here is high bandwidth memory is not commoditized yet. It's not kind of being massively produced by the Chinese out there. The ASPs are very favorable in nature, so they're going to continue to get a benefit not only on the volume on high bandwidth memory, but overall average selling prices will continue to improve.
And it's interesting, Angelo, that you brought up NVIDIA. We were having a discussion about NVIDIA earlier in the show and how it's kind of stalled out, and contrast that with Micron. Now, Micron stock has gone up a lot over the past couple of years. It's up almost 200%, but that doesn't approach what we have seen for NVIDIA. And I think investors have been trying to figure out, okay, what's the next play within AI? Does NVIDIA have the same room for upside, or should I be looking for other things like a Micron potentially that might have more room to run from here? How are you thinking about that question?
I think that's a great question. So, the way I would kind of look at this and just the overall semiconductor industry, and maybe specifically AI semis out there, is typically the best way to make money in semis is find the best content winners, right? The companies that can see the greatest content growth in businesses that are actually growing are going to be the biggest winners out there. And normally it would be a little bit, tough on the memory side of things, because typically those are markets where, again, they're more commoditized and you do see pricing pressure and what have you. But given the specific situation we're in right now, the upside potential and the kind of content growth that you're going to see just based on Jensen's kind of roadmap and what he kind of alluded to in terms of the memory growth here over the next 3 years, I think you're actually going to get more content growth coming on a name like Micron than you are in other aspects of kind of the AI trade out there. So because of that, we do like kind of the memory story out there, specifically tied to Micron. Not to mention, when you look at the valuation of this company, trading at less than 10 times next year's earnings, it's essentially kind of telling you, hey, listen, this is going to be a commoditized play forever. So even if it kind of doesn't turn out the way we think, you're not necessarily paying up for that thesis.
Angela, I wanted to go valuations with you for a second and sort of broaden this conversation out, given the drawdown that we've had across tech and across really most of the names that you cover over the last month, right? What has sort of been sticking out to you on the page over the last month that's more attractive now than it was a month ago? Where do you feel like the good opportunities are in tech broadly?
Yeah, that's another good question. So as far as kind of what we've told investors where we feel a little bit more comfortable in is actually on the software side of things than the hardware side of things. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that you've got the tariff concerns out there hovering over some of these semi plays as well as hardware plays out there where you don't necessarily have that direct concern out there on the software side of things. Software valuations have actually kind of crashed significantly here, not only over the last couple of months, but over the last couple of years, as a lot of those growth rates have decelerated. But the business models are still very much intact, and you've got highly recurring businesses out there. So we do like a number of kind of these lower value oriented type names in software that typically command significantly higher valuations, whether it be a Salesforce, even an Adobe, which has kind of really gotten hit hard. And I understand some of the pressures tied to that business, but I think kind of you're at a point now with some of these valuations where they are definitely looking a lot interesting in nature. And then I'd say be selective on some of these semi names out there. I do think kind of a lot of the tariff concerns out there are kind of discounted in these names. Who knows whether or not this leads into a recession or not. But if not, I think you've got to kind of nibble in some of these names at this point in time. When you look at a name like an NVIDIA and the visibility they have out there, or even a name like a Micron, despite the uncertainties that you have out there, the valuations look pretty enticing.
Makes sense. Angela Zeno, we're going to have to leave it there. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me.